Are you ready for exponential thinking? I think you are. Let's find out. On Planet Human, something amazing happened. It was kind of in Planet Human and kind of in space, but SpaceX launched its massive rocket that is as tall as a skyscraper, and then got it to land back with these little pincers and caught the rocket so it could be reused. Wow, why is this exciting? Because it marks a massive step forward in our journey to Mars and beyond. Because if we can reduce the cost of sending people and things into space, we will be able to get to Mars faster. And this marks the extension of humanity beyond our little blue marble, which is very exciting. On Planet Zoë, I am heading to Western Australia, and I'm going to be doing some work with some Indonesians with Outback Initiative. We are running an experiential outdoor leadership program for them, and they want something that is hard, hard intellectually and physically. So it's going to be a very active, intensive week. And we are focused on helping them develop strong leadership, better execute on their tasks, be more creative thinkers, and basically be better team members. So it's going to be a fulsome week. Other things that are happening on Planet Zoë is Olympus Rising is getting closer to being released. I'm working on the whole launch program for that. So you should be able to order a copy before Christmas. Yay. So I'm looking forward to pressing go on that. So pay attention to your emails if you're signed up as a subscriber to get the first notification of the deal that is going to happen on the ebook as well as the paperback, which you can get signed by moi. The other thing that's happening is that the first draft of Power Games, my first nonfiction book that I've written in 4 years, Power Games, is basically finished. The first draft is finished. So now it's going to go through the editing process with a launch on Kickstarter sort of around May in 2025. So that's everything that's happening on Planet Zoë. What if and how might we? What if producing content, our creative output, we lost our need for the labor component of that, whether it's writing reports or writing a book or anything that produces marketing materials. We kind of lost the need to do that ourselves with things like ChatGPT and other generative AI technology. So if we lose that labor, what does that mean for us? How might we create even better? The genius is going to be in how we ask questions and how we make connections, because generative AI is derivative. It takes everything that it can have access to, lumps it all up, and produces something new. So there's a creative element to that, but it's derivative. It takes everything, condenses it, and produces something, which is very different to the creative genius of humans, which can look at everything that they know, ask questions, create initiative, and build connections, which is not something that AI can do yet. So if we are going to add value as leaders and add value as creators, then we need to get really good at asking genius questions and get really good at creating unusual connections. And that is the birth of something new and valuable to the world. So as leaders, ask great questions, create connections. That's our genius. Well, on Tea Talk, Tea Time in the Office Kitchen, we have Charlotte Kemp. She is a futures alchemist, and she's the author of a book of the same name. And she was a delight to talk with. And what Charlotte does is that she does a lot of public speaking on futures and how to think like a futurist, as well as consulting. So she helps organizations and teams create the futures that they would prefer. And it is with great joy and pleasure that I bring Charlotte Kemp all the way from South Africa to the show. Here we go. Well, all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, here for Tea Time in the Office Kitchen, we have Charlotte Kemp. Welcome.
Thank you, Zoe. I really appreciate the invitation to speak with you today.
And we're going to have such a great conversation because we're talking about exponential thinking. And it's kind of like a topic du jour ever since COVID. You know, everybody understood, all started to really understand exponential graphs. But I don't think what people have really truly understood is what is exponential thinking and where do leaders need to go in order to bridge it? But let's start with the first question. What is actually exponential thinking?
I think exponential thinking is understanding that we have to change our thinking for the pace and the time that we're in. The world is so much faster, so much more complex, and the old models that we were using aren't working anymore. So Peter Diamandis talks about the past being local and linear. So our thinking was linear and the people we knew were local to us. And he says in the present moment, we're having an exponential global conversation. So you and I can share today, even though we're in different parts of the world, which maybe we could have done the last couple of years, but it's now just natural that, when we start a conversation, it's where are you in the world? So things are getting more exponential, way more connected. And obviously we're developing quantum science and quantum computers in the background. So it's a big wake up to us that if we don't actually address how we think about things while we're learning all the new technology, then then we're going to get left behind. We're going to get stuck in old paradigms and models, and we're not going to make the progress we need, or we're going to be left behind while the rest of the world storms through.
I get that. So yeah, so the old 5-year strategic plan, you can throw that out. That's no longer useful for us as a tangible example of how our leadership practice needs to change. When it comes to dealing with exponential thinking or exponential times, volatility, uncertainty, what are the new ways of doing it? If we're no longer in a local and linear type of environment and to this global, interconnected, fast-paced, etc., what are some examples of different ways of approaching our leadership or approaching our thinking do we need to undertake?
I think one of the things that we need to actually learn about is the fact that there is a field of study called futures thinking or strategic foresight, that there are actually models, and we need to learn about those and start to use them. It's what always, in the world where you have a lot of people who understand things very deeply and other people who are still catching up that something actually exists. So I spend a lot of my time convincing people that they are actually natural futurists, and that they can be better futurists. So as humans, if we're thinking about the future and we're planning for our retirement or a holiday in the future or our children's education, or we're taking out insurance or health insurance, we're thinking about the future. We are being futurists. But then we come to the office and everything is moving so fast and there are changes in our industry or changes in the industries of our clients. And we go, well, gosh, how could we tell that there's nothing we can do? We just have to keep up. We have to, grind on and hustle, and none of that works. So when you introduce the concept of futures thinking or futures literacy, and you start to learn a new language, then you've given yourself so many more options about how to actually address any of the challenges you have. So with futures thinking comes all the models that we can use to do scenario planning and look at the different ways that situations can unfold and what the variables are. And it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't give a nice, neat answer, because we have to give up the fact that we can have nice, neat answers in a very complex, interconnected world. But we are preparing our brains to find ways to respond, to anticipate, and to be more agile and flexible in terms of whatever happens next. So we're not left, completely devoid of any tools or ability to respond.
Let's dig into that a little bit, like preparing our brains. I think that's a really interesting way to look at how to look at the future and how to plan for the future. Because as you mentioned, local and linear is what we are very accustomed to. You make a plan, we go from A to B to C, and we kind of progress through our plan that way. So with some of these tools, you mentioned scenario planning as one of them. And I'd be curious to hear what other tools you like to use in your practice. How do these tools actually prepare our brain?
I love scenario planning specifically because I had a small business many years ago, a different lifetime, and things had gone wrong, and we were clearly going to lose this business, and I needed to work out what I needed to do. So I went to an attorney and sat down with him with all the facts and data, and he helped me to understand what was happening with my business. And he painted a picture of, beg your pardon, he painted a picture of what could happen in terms of, people actually coming after the assets of the business or my personal assets and all the legal implications and everything. It was an absolutely horrendous experience. He's explaining the whole thing to me, but my palms were going sweaty, my mouth was going dry. I had that hollow sound in my ears. When you're about to have that kind of, huge anxiety attack, I had all of those physical experiences. And then he gets to the end, and he's a lawyer, so he goes through the stuff all the time. But so he's fine. But he leans back, he goes, but of course, that's not the only thing that could happen. That's the worst case scenario. I said, well, then what else could happen? And I jumped on that. He explained what I needed to do. And I walked out of that office and I took his advice and I did all the right steps and I faced everything. And I went and addressed all the issues. And that worst case scenario never happened. And it was such a tangible physical experience. So when I started working with futures thinking and scenario planning, I realized what had happened there. So our brains can't tell whether what we're thinking about is an imaginary story or if it's a real experience we're going through. Mm-hmm. So when we tell ourselves this worst case story, our brains produce the physical chemicals that do things to our physical body that make us have sweaty palms and dry mouths. And in that state, you can't make good decisions. So if you're looking at the future of your business or your career or your family, and you're looking at that worst case scenario, you can't make a good decision in that crisis moment. You have to allow the body to experience it, and then take a deep breath and then assure yourself and your body and your brain that this is just an exercise and we're safe. Now, what could we do after that? And then once you got past that emotional, chemical cascade, you start actually planning out the practical steps that you would do if that worst case scenario were to happen. So you create a business plan, a marketing plan, a financial plan of what you need to do in that worst case scenario. And then you find another opportunity to sit down and go, now, wow, what would happen if we had the best case scenario? If all of the deals we're working on suddenly come through, we get a client who just loves us and wants all of our time and attention, and people want to invest in us. And this is so exciting. And when you start doing that, new chemicals are going through your brain, and there's the dopamine and the endorphins and everything else. And you start thinking about how would you spend all the profit that you're going to earn from this wonderful experience. And you cannot make good decisions in that moment because your body and your brain are just full of chemicals. So you actually have to physically experience, go, wow, that would be so cool. Now, in reality, what would we do? Because if we had all those opportunities, do we have the capacity? Do we have the cash flow? Do we have the personnel or the expertise or the talent? How would we do these things? What are the things on our calendars that we just put there to fill in our calendars, but would need to be abandoned if we're going to do this best case scenario? And then you work that out. Now you've got a business plan, a marketing plan, a financial plan for the best case scenario. And then you work out something in between. This is like our regular run-of-the-mill kind of business plan. But what you've done is you have acknowledged the fact that your brain and body are connected, and you can sometimes make bad decisions in a crisis moment. You've got very practical plans to deal with things, regardless of which way it goes. But you've also primed your brain to look for the flags or the indicators of what is happening. So if you lose a client, if something happens in your industry that makes one of your products, irrelevant because of a new invention or new technology, you're primed for that. You're looking for it. And when you see it and you go, that could threaten my livelihood, we don't overreact. We don't panic. We go, that would be awful. But you know what? We've actually already got a plan for this. So you can pull out the plan and look at it, and you've got practical steps. But your brain is primed to look for those indicators. Your brain knows that you've dealt with it, so you don't need to make crisis decisions. And you are actually more primed to create better opportunities for yourself because you're not just running in like a protection mode, just trying to protect what you have, because you know that there's a variety of ways to go. So that's why I love working with scenario plans, whether it's personal or all the way to business. The ancient Stoics used to do that really negative plan. They called it premeditatio malorum, which is a premeditation of evils. And I just love saying that. So we need to
premeditato malorium.
Yeah. So we need to premeditate on the things that are bad, not to wallow in them, but to come up with a practical way to respond.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much. And I've heard of Tim Ferriss does something called fear setting, which is essentially that, like imagine the worst place, worst thing that can happen and make a plan for that. Navy SEALs do that all the time. And sort of looking into the mission that they're going into, they look at, if all goes pear shaped, what do we do? And when I interviewed a couple of Navy SEALs about this, they said it actually helps them feel calmer. For me, I was like, oh my God, don't you just go around looking at everything, just waiting for the worst? He's like, nah, I do all the prep up front and then I can relax because they know that the brain will go into muscle memory or biochemical memory and execute on that. As you mentioned, be primed to look for the flags that can preempt a particular pathway of action. I love that. And what's interesting about what you just shared is the need to actually go into the emotional zone of either the best case or worst case or somewhere in between to allow the biochemicals to process and then go, right, okay, practical application. It's an interesting that we have to go through that biochemical stuff and first before we can get to the intellectual unpacking of it. I hadn't heard that before, but it's also a great testimony or advocacy for reading fiction because that's what fiction does. It gives you these scenarios, which pushes you into different emotional corners. And you go through it with the characters and come through at the other end, hopefully having learned something. So it builds up your personal resilience for dealing with all sorts of chaos, including aliens.
Yeah. I have a few people that I've encountered who, when we start talking about the future, and one in particular about science fiction in general, they say, oh, no, we don't want to think about that. It's too scary. And that is the problem that people are experiencing, is that because the world is so fast and there's so much more information, it feels overwhelming. And we are afraid of what we don't know. We are afraid of the bad thing that could happen. And when you sit down and say, well, look at all the bad things that have already happened to you and you've overcome them. Look at all the bad things that are happening in a country or a part of the world, and there are ways to address them. There's not some, mystical bad thing in the future. The future is just going to be another day of things that people are experiencing. So it's not this huge unknown. Let's give it names and words and models. And when you look at science fiction, it's saying this is a scenario. The world could play out like that. Great movie for Hollywood or wherever. Do we want a future like that? No. Well, then what action can we take now? So do we want that worst case scenario? No. Then what action can you take now? And so you can actually start, kind of really expressing your own agency over the future instead of just feeling like you are responding to crises.
So sinking into fear and overwhelm with what we at first glance looks overwhelming and unqualifiable, this exponential world that we're living in, is one of the mistakes we make when we're doing strategic thinking or not doing strategic thinking. What are some other mistakes that leaders do when it comes to thinking and planning strategically or not strategically?
Yeah. We've learned really good things in business school about, models and best practice. And I think far too often people are leaning on those old models and old learning and just trying to do it harder, faster, better. And we hold on to something that is good. Like we've done things in our careers. We've taken, actions or we've positioned ourselves in certain ways. What we've done in the past has got us here. So we think, well, then it's good. It's successful. That's what we want. And no, it's not anymore. What got us here won't get us to the next stage. We have to be able to abandon something that is good, but that is not good enough or is not flexible enough or won't take us into the future.
How do we know what that is, though, Charlotte? Like, because we want to hang on to the stuff that we know works. How do we know that it's not fit for the future? How do we know that it's time to abandon it?
Yeah, that's a deep question. I don't have an easy answer for it, but I can make something up as we speak. um, I think, I encounter a number of leaders who are very conscious. They're conscious of their leadership, of their engagement with people, on of what that means. They're looking at like the emotional energy in a team. They're looking at what do the individuals in their team want to experience in their life so that they can be better at what they're doing. How can this as a person, as a leader, position and support them to do that? Whereas other leaders are using the old kind of hierarchical model of they know everything and they're going to lead this team and, you know, go into the future and do things. And that hierarchical structure doesn't work anymore because the leader doesn't know everything anymore. The experts don't know everything anymore because there's too much to know. So if we can be kind of conscious and open to saying, in this team of people, there is expertise, there is insight, there is experience that we can lean on, then we can grow. So a leader who is not willing to be open to being wrong or open to changing things is not going to be able to identify the fact that things are not working. They're going to see their business fail or their team fail, or they can't meet projections, and they're going to say, you know, the team hasn't worked hard enough, or there isn't commitment or engagement. They're going to look for an external source of why things haven't worked. But the more conscious leader is going to be saying, even if they're reaching their goals, they're going to say, how can we do this better? Who in the team needs more support so that they can express things for the benefit of everyone in the team? And they would be more open to identifying those challenges, or open to someone else coming to them and saying, things have changed or moved on. What you're trying to do doesn't work anymore. We need to retool this. We need to find a new way to express this. And they would be open to actually doing that, even if it meant that they had to go, you know, back to school and learn something new in terms of their leadership.
Okay. So one of the mistakes is not being open to being wrong and not being open to other people's expertise. I get that.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a stage of leadership maturity, which is not fit for the future, where the whole
Yeah.
model of the leadership has the vision and is the source and font of all knowledge. And we fight human nature with that, I think, because we do have a tendency to default to authority. And the
Yeah.
CEO or the leader of the team embodies that. So for them to be fallible and wrong, sometimes we don't want to challenge them. And I've seen that play out in a number of different scenarios. So the onus is on the leader to demonstrate that they are open to that, express it, model it, encourage it, and create an environment where it's okay to retool, to make suggestions to retool and to challenge and so on. This idea of exponentiality, I'm curious about. And I'm wondering if there's anything more we need to explore with that, in terms of exponential change is intimidating. Our brains aren't built for that. We're built for more linear progression. One of the tools we use to try and deal with that kind of accelerated change is scenario planning, to look at, okay, things are going to change rapidly. What could that look like? What are some other thinking tools we can use to help us deal with this exponentiality that our brains aren't ready for?
Mm. When I start this conversation, I normally kind of go right back to, you know, a good old fashioned pyramid. And at the bottom is mindset. The middle is toolset, and the top is skill set. And that's a nice way to kind of introduce this conversation to people without overwhelming them, so that they feel like, oh, they've got to go back and get a new university degree. Education and continuous education is incredibly important. But I never want a person to feel like they can't do anything more until they've gone back and learned a whole bunch of new stuff, because that doesn't work. So we need to be more flexible, learning on the go. But the foundation of mindset is really important. And I've been spending more time myself trying to unpack what is a good mindset? How do we change our mindset? If you go online and you start looking at this, it comes up with two things. Like almost 95% of the stuff I've been seeing is talking about a fixed mindset or an agile mindset. Open. So fixed and agile. Your fixed mindset, you know, these are the rules, and agile is like, you know, I'm open to change. And that's great, but there are other mindsets. There are other ways we think. And I'm trying to really work out what that is, and then how do we intentionally redevelop our mindset? How are we willing to change? That mindset, learning new futures thinking, futures literacy, learning the terminology, learning the concept, learning that there is a way to approach it, getting past our ego, that we don't know everything, that we're not the absolute expert, knowing that we have to rely and work with other people, and that there's this whole kind of complexity of a teamwork, like the systems thinking approach in terms of how the team works or how an organization works. All of that it's kind of like in that big mindset place. And once we've dealt with that, it's like most of the job is done, because now we're going, okay, now what tools do we have to address that? And then we can go into all of the tools, realizing that they are tools and that we get better with tools over time. And that's the skill set right at the top. Mm. In the tools, again, I like to make this really simple. So all of the wonderful tools and models that we have available in business and futures thinking, all of them actually fall into 4 stages. And it's really neat. The very first stage is gathering intelligence. So what is it that we need to know about our circumstance or about this project or about the industry sector? So gather intelligence. The second part is manage change. The leader has to change, the team has to change, everything around us is changing exponentially. What is the psychology about how we relate to change? Why do we resist change? Very broadly, we as humans like change when we initiate it, when we say this has to happen. We don't like change when it's imposed on us. Mm-hmm. So how can we in a team help the team to realize what it is that they want to do to change, rather than the leader come in and say, all right, you guys are not up to scratch, you have to make these changes. So we want to, the whole kind of change management part. The third part is describing the future. That's where scenario planning comes in, and visioning. And that for me is the fun part. Mm. And then the fourth part is kind of testing the strategy. Have we achieved what we need to? What is happening in the world that has shifted since we started this little initiative? And then you go back again. So gather intelligence, manage change, describe the future, test your strategy. And all of the tools are encompassed in those 4 stages. And then it's a nice way to think about it. So then you can tap into, if there's a tool you've used in the past that works, like you want to do a SWOT analysis instead of a scenario plan or a futures wheel, you can do that. And next time you've got a deeper understanding, now let's try the futures wheel and see what comes up. That's how I would kind of approach that whole section of tools. I love them. I feel like people are armed with tools that they can now do something with, rather than just feeling like they have to make up something from scratch. They don't. There's all the stuff we can use. We just need people to understand what they're trying to achieve with it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I think my observation is that the circular nature, the experiential cycle aspect of it, is often what's missing with leaders. They don't enact that cycle at all, or if they do, not frequently enough. So actually, that's a tactical, I don't know, it's a tactical strategic question. How often should people go through this cycle? Does it depend on the context or what's happening?
Yes, I think it could. But if an individual is trying to do this, I think that first part of gathering intelligence should always be open. So we should learn the whole kind of horizon scanning and skills like that. In that space, I often say to people kind of 2 very practical things that they can do. One is to spend some time online looking for organizations to follow. So you want to subscribe to a whole bunch of newsletters. Not that we want more, emails and things. We create an email program and a rule, and it all goes into a separate folder. But go and look for, if you're a big multinational, you go look for a local kind of business in the same field. If you are in nonprofits, you go and look at something commercial. If you're in South Africa, you go and look at something in Canada or in India. So you look at different parts of the world, you look at different industries, different business models that somehow relate. Sign up to newsletters that, newspapers, news reports. And sign up to these things around the world so that you can get a lot of different information coming to you very gently. And you also look at comparative reading. So if you're on one side of the political aisle, you sign up for some stuff on the other side. If you've got a religious perspective, you look for some opposite religious perspectives. And if you look at the newsletter idea, you just allow it to come into this folder. And then once a week, you sit there with a cup of coffee and you scroll through the headlines of the newsletters. You don't even have to read the entire thing, but you've just now sourced little bits of information from all over the place. And you're kind of like exposing yourself to, this is how other people think about this. This is why people on the other side of the political aisle, this is how they're thinking. This is how they're positioning things. And as you're scrolling through the headlines, that's enough to get your brain to think about, wow, the world isn't only seen from my perspective, from my country, from my worldview. If something really triggers that looks interesting, you want to click on that, have a look at the newsletter. If something is really interesting, you can follow that down for a little bit. But at the end of that hour of time exploring this, delete everything. It's like you don't have to study the stuff. Just delete it and wait until next week again. And that is enough to keep us gathering intelligence, so that we're not caught unawares. And if we go, wow, this headline talks about a new invention that I heard about a month ago, and then I saw something else in a different part of the world, and you're starting to get those tiny little flags that this could be a weak signal of something that could be important, that could relate to you or to your clients or to your value chain. So that's a nice practical technique to look at.
I think that's an interesting one, that it can go one of two ways, because it feeds our pattern recognition brain. So once we look for the little flags, it's like, oh, okay, we get that surge of dopamine and anandamide, which is all the positive biochemicals. So it actually is supportive of that. And at the same time, it could be building an echo chamber, though your antidote to that is signing up to things that are completely different to your world. So I think there's a fine line to go with that.
Yes, yeah. No, it definitely is. We need to be very intentional about looking for information outside of our echo chamber, because it's so easy just to keep finding the same stuff. And then one day you have a family conversation and you go, oh my goodness, my family has got completely different values to me. So yeah, we have to be intentional about that.
So I want to just test this a little bit in terms of how do we inoculate against some of these traps. So for example, like as I'm doing my environmental scanning, one of the things I've noticed about myself is that I'm scanning for indicators of recession. And I'm wondering if it's me looking at a confirmation bias, looking for, like, I know it's happening, where's the proof kind of thing. How do we avoid going into that trap as opposed to staying open to other flags?
Well, I think that would be interesting if we're looking for something and we sit down and we start a project to actually look for that kind of information, then just put an extra step and say, what would it look like if what I'm searching for is the exact opposite? How would we find that? And actually do the same exercise, play your own, dare I say, devil's advocate, and look for the opposite. I'll tell you how it plays out here in South Africa. I'm a professional speaker, a futurist keynote speaker. So I'm in the speaking world and in the futures world. And I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit in this last year, last 12 months from now. And when I go to different parts of the world and we're talking about things, there's a gentle comment about Africa about like, oh, but there aren't any African futurists. There aren't any significant African speakers. And so in a very subtle, down low way, I have just been highlighting these people. So I'm about to finish a journal contributed to by various futurists who've written in Africa. So I'm saying you either have to be living in Africa or you have studied in Africa, and we're writing various articles and things just to demonstrate. Here is a document to say that there are futurists in Africa. Here is a conference to say that there are speakers in Africa. And we can find those ways to kind of, if we're identifying that something has been overlooked, we want to shine a bit of a light on that. And for ourselves, we need to very intentionally go and look for the opposite thing as well.
Okay. And I think, yeah, it's sort of testing your hypothesis. And I think if you have like being conscious that you have a hypothesis about the landscape and then testing that hypothesis is useful. Okay, thank you. That was really awesome. All right. What or who is an example of leading exponentially or doing this kind of work well?
Yeah, I thought about that and I can't necessarily, and I know that there should be people that I'm thinking of, but I'll tell you the opposite is um, there are lots of entrepreneurs who are really working out how to use technology and just be able to achieve so much more. So they're using all the economies of scale, and they're using the applications, and they're using flexible workforces. But the opposite of that is the whole culture that is being developed in with entrepreneurs and people on the gig economy who just want to hustle. It almost feels like they're just trying to work faster all the time and achieve more without actually making any significant changes. I did a workshop this week with just talking about artificial intelligence. So there's a couple of businesses here in South Africa that they're really good, solid people. They've done really well in their businesses, but they haven't really worked out what to do with AI. So we were kind of addressing that. And one of them was a guy who had built up a business. It's very kind of mechanical and got things to do with airplanes, and I did not understand it, but he built it up from scratch years ago, had a big team of like 40 people, and then he'd sold the business to another bigger company in South Africa, and he retired, and then he got bored after a while, so he came back with two of his colleagues, and they've got a team of 8 people now, and they can do what those 40 people were doing before. So they just recreated the business with 8 people, because now they're using technologies and AI and platforms and intelligence. They're not just throwing all the old business models at it. They just found a completely new way to do the business much more efficiently and effectively.
How do they do that? Like, in terms of how did they look at the existing business and then create a new one? Was it iterative or was it revolutionary?
I think in this case, it was definitely a revolutionary approach, because they started it again from scratch. So they didn't start with their legacy systems. Another client I worked with recently, the business has been around for like 60 years, also big machinery and manufacturing and things. And the MD was taking me around the shop floor, and you're seeing the very practical things that they have to do. And a lot of it is bespoke. So they can't automate the office part. But then he shows me other things, and he shows me, like clipboards of written information. And he says, every month we look at one of the little communication elements in the business, or, one of the ways of kind of like the workflows. And we look at that and say, how can we automate this? How can we make this better? How do we remove this physical thing? And for them, it is an iterative process, but they're aware of it and they're addressing it one by one. So we can do both. And obviously, the whole iterative process is important because it's how we get better. So we need to know that. We need to kind of, constantly become better or more efficient, the whole Kaizen approach. But then there has to be a time where we sit back and go, we've gone as far as we can go. We can get much, much better at this, but it's now in the wrong direction. It now no longer serves us. We have to get rid of that entirely and start something new. And that is scary. But in certain cases, if a business doesn't do that, they will get left behind. They will be the business that has failed, while the new businesses coming up that are not burdened by that legacy can actually move a lot faster. And that was what the second company was really addressing, is they know that they're good, they know that they can deliver on everything, but the other businesses, when a client asks for a quote, the other business can give it to them in like 4 or 5 hours, and they're still taking 3 days. And that is their big problem. So how do they make this better without compromising any of the value that they put into that initial quote design for the client?
I think what's interesting about that, like the need to, go in a completely different direction and be more revolutionary as opposed to iterative, the ability to do that, I think, comes back to your pyramid and the bottom layer of mindset, because each of us have different appetites for kind of risk and our relationship to change. So it kind of circles back to that fundamental component of how fit for the future are we? What is our mindset? What is our value? What is our relationship to change and to success and to failure? So it all comes back to that human nature stuff in some regards. Yeah. Charlotte, are you ready for the Fast 3?
Fast 3. Let's go for it.
Okay. What is the future technology you most want right now?
This doesn't exist, and I don't know if it ever will, but this is what I want, is the ability to take a picture that is in my brain that is so clear and actually get it out onto something else. That is the technology I wish existed.
Wow. I thought, isn't that what writing is? But maybe it's not clear enough.
It's not, it's like, yeah, just to be able to kind of like really communicate something so clearly that is in the brain. Yeah,
That is cool.
science
Okay.
fiction.
Yeah, I'm going to think about that. And also, some people don't have visual capability. I've met someone who actually doesn't have a visual brain at all. They can't picture things. So that's a pretty big challenge for them. All right, number two, best tip you ever got for leadership.
Uh, this was quite interesting. We did it during COVID. When something goes wrong with a team and with a person in a team and they need to ask for help, very often they come with all of the excuses and reasons why, and it almost feels like this very public shaming of this is why I can't do this thing. And it got really awkward. And I said, you don't need to explain. You're a grown adult. If there's a problem, you tell me there's a problem and we fix the problem. You don't have to give me excuses. So we used a safe word instead. And the safe word was fruit salad. And so a person can come and say, fruit salad, I need help with this. And they don't have to, beat up on themselves and people will step in. And that has been so powerful. It came up by accident entirely. But everybody in the circle who is using this is now very open to say, I need help. This is my fruit salad. Or sometimes it's a fruit pie or it's like a big or small, but it's just a nice language to be able to give people space to explore something and ask for help without having to be personal about things.
Okay, I love it. Fruit salad, I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
Okay, number three, what are you reading or listening to right now?
I am so glad you asked that question because I got gifted with a library the other day as a leadership position came to an end. I had a list in Take a Lot, which is like our version of Amazon here, and they spoke to my husband, and they arrived yesterday. And this is what I'm reading now. This is some
Looks
of them.
heavy. Oh my God, that's a lot of books.
It is,
Oh,
but
wow.
all of those books are science fiction or fantasy written by African authors.
Oh,
And I went and looked for them, and I've read one or two already, and they're so interesting. But just to see, like we were saying before, that comparative reading, all of our science fiction that I've been engaged with is kind of like American European science fiction, the stuff that Hollywood would end up doing, and it's good. My favorite all-time person is Isaac Asimov. But I thought, what does it look like in other parts of the world? And so this is what I will be exploring. There's a whole bunch of really interesting ones that kind of like touch a little bit into African culture and mythology, and a lot of emphasis on the power of women in societies and how they express their power in these stories. So that's what I'll
awesome.
be reading.
Thank you. Now, because I'm a book nerd, can you take a picture of your stack of books and send it to me? And I'll include that in the show
Will
notes.
do. I will do.
Oh, awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Charlotte. That was the fast three.
Thank you.
Coming to the end now, is there anything I haven't asked that you would like me to ask and you would love to answer?
Wow. I think we've explored a whole lot of really interesting things and most of my favorite topics. Um, I think when people talk to me about futures thinking, I get very excited and passionate, and then they do, and then I start talking about too many things and they feel overwhelmed. So I like to bring it down to like a really simple thing. We are all natural futurists, and we're going into the future, and there are going to be some things that are scary and difficult, and that's just life. We're grown-ups. But the best thing to do is to be curious. Just be curious about what comes next, not to judge it straight off and say, no, this is good or bad. Most of these things are tools. Tools are neutral. But if we're curious about what this means or what we discover, beg your pardon. If we're curious about what this means or what we can discover with a new insight or how somebody now identifies himself or what this new technology is about, that will help us to be open to learning and growing and going into a future that really is quite going to be interesting and exciting.
It's definitely
Curiosity.
interesting and exciting, that's for sure. Charlotte, where can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Best place will be LinkedIn. I'm there, and I have a website called futuresalchemist.com, and that's where I put a lot of the futures content.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this this conversation, this tea time in the office kitchen.
Sorry, thank you so much.
On Read to Lead, we have Charlotte Kemp's book, Futurist Alchemist. This is a delightful little handbook, and it's a cross between an allegorical, fantastical, magical journey in how to think like a futurist. Charlotte uses the narrative of a woman who goes into a new workplace and is trying to figure out how to be of service and of value, and she learns all about these futures thinking tools. And along the way, she teaches us how to develop a map of our thinking, of how we're thinking about the past and the future and the present, and how that affects the decisions that we make moving forward. And also teaches us some valuable tools like causal layered analysis that we can deploy as leaders to look at what's going on beneath the surface of the challenges in which we seek. She also has a 4-step process to help us make sense of the world, which is looking at the landscape, creating possible futures, testing a hypothesis or testing your strategy. Did I get all the steps correctly? I'm not sure that I did. I forgot manage change. That was step 2. So we gather intelligence, manage change, describe the future, and test the strategy. All that in this one little book, Futurist Alchemist, highly recommended. Well, that's the show for this week. I do hope you enjoyed this really deep and rich conversation with Charlotte. I certainly did. I made a ton of notes. I think our ability to think productively about the future and to navigate it well is a core skill that we need as leaders, and not one that we exercise well enough. So off you go, do some work. Learn how to scan the horizon, learn how to do a causal layered analysis. And with those 2 things, you'll be much better at imagining the future and then navigating it well. If you'd like to go deeper on any of these topics, consider being a subscriber to the show, an insider. Every insider gets an email along with the access to the show links. And with that, we have a checklist and implementation tip sheet for you on the concepts that we raise in the show. We also have some great provocative questions you can use with your team so you can get even more value out of listening and watching the show. And interesting factoids to make you look smarty pants at a party. So you just go to zoerouth.com, click on podcast, and you can sign up to be a podcast insider there. I would love to see you there. In the meantime, please share what you love about the show on social media. Reach out to me at zoe@zoerouth.com and click subscribe on your platform that you're watching or listening to. It really does help boost the visibility of the show to get these ideas and these skills into more people's hands. And when we have better leaders, we have a better world. In the meantime, live with grace, lead in service, live well, lead well.